The rain hammered against the church windows like 1,000 angry fists, but Maya stood perfectly still in her white dress, staring at the empty altar. 3 hours had passed since the ceremony was supposed to begin. The guests had long since departed, their whispered sympathies floating behind them like ghosts. Her mother had begged her to take off the dress, to accept what everyone else already knew. Daniel wasn't coming. He would never come again. The police had found his car wrapped around an oak tree on Highway 47, just 20 miles from the church. The officer who delivered the news had removed his hat, his hands trembling as he spoke the words that shattered Maya's world into a million irreparable pieces. Daniel was gone. The wedding was cancelled. Her future had died on a rain-slicked road at 3 in the morning. But Maya refused to believe it. She couldn't explain the feeling that pulsed through her veins like electricity, the certainty that lived in her bones. Daniel had promised to marry her. Daniel never broke his promises. Somewhere in the space between logic and faith, Maya constructed a belief that defied everything she knew about death and reality. He would come back. He had to come back. Her sister found her in the bridal suite at midnight, still wearing the dress, mascara rivers dried on her cheeks. The wedding cake sat untouched in the reception hall, its white fondant flowers beginning to wilt in the humid air. Maya's bouquet lay scattered across the floor, petals crushed beneath her shoes as she paced the small room, her mind racing through impossible scenarios. The funeral was scheduled for Tuesday. Maya didn't attend. Instead, she sat in the apartment they were supposed to share, surrounded by unpacked boxes and dreams that would never materialize. She wore her wedding dress every day, convinced that when Daniel returned, he would want to see her as his bride. Her friends tried to reach her, but she let their calls go to voicemail. They didn't understand. They couldn't feel what she felt. Days blurred into nights. Maya set 2 plates at the dinner table, prepared meals for 2, spoke to the empty air as if Daniel sat across from her. Her mother came by with groceries and tear-stained cheeks, begging her daughter to face reality. But reality was a concept Maya had abandoned at the altar. In her world, Daniel was simply delayed. In her world, love was stronger than death. She found his shirts in the closet and buried her face in them, searching for his scent. She played their voicemails back, his voice a lifeline in the drowning silence of grief. She read their text messages until her eyes burned, tracing the words "I love you" with her fingertip as if she could somehow pull him through the screen and back into existence. The apartment became a shrine to waiting. Wedding gifts remained wrapped, stacked against the walls like monuments to a future that existed only in her imagination. The marriage certificate sat on the kitchen counter, unsigned and official, a legal document without meaning. Maya stared at it sometimes, wondering if belief alone could make something real. People said she was in denial. They used words like trauma and breakdown. They suggested therapy and medication and time. But Maya knew something they didn't. She knew that in the moment before Daniel's car hit that tree, he must have thought of her. She knew that love like theirs didn't just evaporate into nothing. It had to go somewhere. It had to mean something. So she waited. 1 week became 2. 2 weeks became 3. She wore the wedding dress until it wrinkled and stained, until the white fabric turned gray with time and tears. She lived in a bubble of magical thinking, where death was negotiable and promises transcended the physical world. The knock on her door came on day 21, just as the sun began to set. Maya's heart leaped. She knew that knock. She recognized the rhythm. Daniel had come home at last. She ran to the door, her dress swirling around her legs, her hand shaking as she reached for the handle. This was the moment she'd been waiting for. This was when everything would make sense again. Maya threw open the door, her breath caught in her throat, her eyes already brimming with tears of relief. But the person standing in the hallway wasn't Daniel. It was a little girl, no more than 6 years old, with tangled brown hair and eyes that looked far too old for her small face. She wore a pink jacket 2 sizes too big and carried a backpack covered in cartoon characters. Behind her stood a middle-aged woman in a blazer, holding a clipboard and wearing an expression of professional exhaustion. The disappointment that crashed through Maya was so intense she nearly collapsed. Her knees buckled slightly, and she gripped the door frame to steady herself. The woman with the clipboard spoke first, her voice carrying the rehearsed gentleness of someone who delivered bad news for a living. She introduced herself as Patricia Chen from Child Protective Services. The little girl's name was Sophie. They needed to talk. Maya wanted to close the door. She wanted to crawl back into her cocoon of grief and waiting. But something in Sophie's eyes stopped her. The child stared at Maya's wedding dress with an expression that wasn't curiosity or confusion. It was recognition. It was understanding. It was the look of someone who knew exactly what it meant to wait for something that would never come. Patricia explained the situation quickly, her words tumbling out like she'd said them 100 times before. Sophie's mother had been arrested for drug possession. Her father was unknown. There were no other relatives willing to take her in. The foster system was overloaded, and emergency placements were running out. Patricia had a list of potential temporary guardians, and Maya's name was on it. Maya's mother had suggested her, thinking that perhaps caring for a child might help her daughter face reality. Maya shook her head before Patricia finished speaking. She couldn't take care of a child. She could barely take care of herself. She was waiting for Daniel. She had to be ready when he came back. How could Patricia possibly expect her to take responsibility for another human being when her own life was suspended in this liminal space between hope and madness? But Sophie stepped forward, her small hand reaching out to touch the lace on Maya's dress. The child's fingers traced the delicate pattern with a reverence that made Maya's chest ache. Sophie looked up at her with those impossibly old eyes and asked a question in a voice barely above a whisper. She asked if Maya was a princess. She asked if princesses could have little girls stay with them. Maya opened her mouth to say no. The word formed on her tongue, ready to emerge and send this child back into the system, back into the uncertain chaos of temporary homes and temporary people. But Sophie's hand remained on her dress, and Maya felt something shift inside her. It wasn't a dramatic transformation. It wasn't a sudden clarity. It was simply a crack in the wall she'd built around herself, a hairline fracture that let in the smallest sliver of light. Patricia sensed the hesitation and pressed her advantage. It would only be for a few days, she promised. Just until a proper foster placement opened up. Sophie was a good kid, quiet, easy. She wouldn't be any trouble. Maya would barely notice she was there. It was just a temporary solution to a temporary problem. Maya looked down at Sophie, and Sophie looked back. The little girl's expression was neutral, as if she'd learned not to hope for anything too strongly. She'd probably been rejected before, passed from door to door like an unwanted package. Maya recognized that look. She'd seen it in her own mirror for the past 3 weeks. Against every instinct screaming at her to refuse, Maya stepped aside and let them in. The apartment still looked like her abandoned wedding venue. White roses dying in vases, wrapped presents everywhere, the wedding dress she refused to take off. Patricia's professional mask slipped for just a moment, her eyes widening at the scene. But she recovered quickly, focusing on the paperwork instead. Sophie walked slowly through the apartment, her small figure weaving between the boxes and gifts. She didn't touch anything, didn't ask questions. She simply observed, taking in this strange new place with the practiced wariness of someone who knew that nothing lasted forever. She stopped in front of a photograph on the mantel, a picture of Maya and Daniel at the beach, both of them laughing, the sun setting behind them. Maya signed the temporary guardianship papers without reading them. Patricia handed her a folder full of information about Sophie's medical history, her school records, her behavioral notes. Everything you needed to know about a 6-year-old stranger compressed into manila folders and typed forms. Patricia promised to check in tomorrow, thanked Maya repeatedly, and left with obvious relief. The door closed, and suddenly Maya was alone with Sophie. The silence stretched between them, awkward and heavy. Maya had no idea what to say to a child. She had no idea how to be anything other than a bride waiting for a groom who would never arrive. Sophie sat down on the couch, her backpack still on her shoulders, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Maya realized she was still wearing the wedding dress. She looked down at the stained, wrinkled fabric and felt a wave of shame wash over her. What must this child think of her? But when she looked up, Sophie wasn't judging her. The little girl was simply waiting, just as Maya had been waiting. Two people suspended in time, both hoping for something impossible. The first night was a disaster. Maya had no food suitable for a child, no extra bed, no idea what 6-year-olds needed. She ordered pizza and watched Sophie eat exactly 2 slices, methodically removing each pepperoni and placing it on the side of her plate. The child didn't complain. She didn't ask for anything different. She simply adapted to what was available, and that broke Maya's heart in a way she hadn't expected. Sophie slept on the couch, wrapped in a blanket that still smelled like Daniel. Maya lay awake in her bedroom, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft sounds of the child's breathing in the other room. For 3 weeks, Maya had existed in a bubble where time had no meaning, where she could pretend that Daniel might walk through the door at any moment. But children operated on real time. They needed breakfast and dinner and bedtimes. They anchored you to reality whether you wanted to be anchored or not. The next morning, Maya finally took off the wedding dress. She stood in front of her closet for 20 minutes, the decision feeling monumental and terrifying. When she emerged in jeans and a sweater, Sophie looked at her with something that might have been approval. The little girl had already folded her blanket and was sitting at the kitchen table, her backpack beside her, waiting for whatever came next. Maya made pancakes, burning the first 3 and nearly setting off the smoke alarm. Sophie ate them anyway, drowning them in syrup and offering Maya a small smile that felt like a gift. They sat together in silence, 2 damaged people trying to navigate a situation neither of them had asked for. Maya realized she hadn't eaten a proper meal in days. She'd been surviving on coffee and denial. After breakfast, Sophie asked if she could see the wedding presents. Maya hesitated, but something in the child's curiosity felt innocent, unthreatening. They spent the morning opening gifts together. Crystal vases and kitchen appliances, monogram towels and picture frames meant for happy couple photos. Each gift was a reminder of a future that would never exist, but Sophie's excitement somehow made them bearable. The little girl held up a silver picture frame and looked at Maya with serious eyes. She asked if Maya missed her prince. The question was so direct, so honest, that Maya felt tears spring to her eyes. She nodded, unable to speak. Sophie nodded back, as if this confirmed something she already knew. Then the child said something that changed everything. She said her mama had promised to come back too, but she never did. She said waiting hurt too much, so she decided to stop. The words hung in the air between them. Maya felt something crack open inside her chest, something she'd been holding closed with sheer force of will. Sophie wasn't being cruel. She was being truthful in the way only children can be. She was sharing the hardest lesson she'd ever learned. Patricia called that afternoon to check in. She sounded surprised when Maya answered, as if she'd expected the arrangement to have fallen apart already. She said they'd found a foster placement for Sophie, a family in the next county. They could take her by the end of the week. Maya said okay, but the word tasted wrong in her mouth. Over the next few days, something shifted between Maya and Sophie. The child began to relax, her shoulders dropping from their permanent defensive hunch. She started asking questions about the photos on the walls, about Maya's life before. Maya found herself talking about Daniel not as a ghost she was waiting for, but as a person who had lived and loved and died. The past tense felt like betrayal at first, but then it felt like truth. Sophie had nightmares. Maya would wake to the sound of crying and find the little girl curled up on the couch, tears streaming down her face. She'd climb in next to her, holding her small body until the shaking stopped. In those dark hours, Maya realized that grief wasn't something you could negotiate with or outsmart. It was something you had to move through, step by painful step. They went to the park, Sophie's first trip outside in days. Maya watched the little girl on the swings, her hair flying behind her, her laughter piercing the autumn air. A woman at the playground commented on what a beautiful daughter Maya had. Maya started to correct her, then stopped. For that moment, sitting on a bench watching Sophie play, Maya felt something other than the crushing weight of loss. She felt almost normal. That evening, they cooked dinner together. Sophie stood on a chair at the counter, helping mix pasta sauce, tomatoes splashing on her shirt. She told Maya about her mother, her voice matter-of-fact about things no child should have to accept. She said she used to think her mama would get better, would come get her. But her social worker explained that sometimes people couldn't be who you needed them to be, no matter how much you loved them. Maya recognized herself in that statement. She'd been clinging to a ghost, refusing to acknowledge that Daniel couldn't be who she needed him to be anymore. Not because he didn't want to, but because he simply couldn't. Death had made that choice for both of them. Accepting that didn't mean she loved him less. It just meant she was finally telling the truth. Sophie asked Maya to read her a bedtime story. Maya found an old book from her own childhood and sat on the edge of the couch, the little girl tucked against her side. She read about brave princesses and magical kingdoms, her voice steady for the first time in weeks. When she finished, Sophie was almost asleep. She mumbled something Maya almost missed. She said Maya would make someone a good mama someday. Friday morning arrived with unexpected clarity. The sky was impossibly blue, the kind of autumn day that made you believe in fresh starts. Patricia was supposed to come at noon to take Sophie to her new foster placement. Maya had packed the little girl's belongings, folded her clothes, made sure her backpack was ready. Everything was prepared for the goodbye neither of them wanted to say out loud. Sophie was unusually quiet at breakfast. She pushed her cereal around the bowl, her small face troubled. Maya recognized the expression. She'd worn it herself for weeks, the look of someone bracing for inevitable loss. Maya wanted to promise the child that everything would be okay, but she'd learned that some promises were impossible to keep. Sometimes life broke you, and all you could do was gather the pieces and try to move forward. They spent the morning playing board games, Sophie winning every round with serious concentration. Maya realized she was memorizing these moments, storing them away like treasures. This child had wandered into her life at the worst possible moment and somehow made it bearable. Sophie had shown her that grief didn't have to be a prison. That waiting for the impossible meant missing what was real and present and right in front of you. At 11:30, Maya found herself in the bathroom, staring at her reflection. She barely recognized the woman looking back at her. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a bride consumed by denial. Now she was someone who'd learned to make pancakes without burning them, who could soothe nightmares and tie shoelaces and read bedtime stories. Sophie had needed her to be functional, so she'd become functional. Sometimes you rose to meet someone else's need and found yourself transformed in the process. When she returned to the living room, Sophie was standing by the window, her backpack on, her small frame rigid with an emotion Maya couldn't quite read. The little girl turned when she heard Maya approach, and her eyes were filled with tears. But there was determination there too, a courage that seemed impossibly large for such a small person. Sophie took a deep breath and asked if she could say something important. Maya nodded, kneeling down to be at eye level with the child. Sophie's voice trembled as she spoke, but her words were clear. She said she knew Maya was sad about her prince. She said she understood about waiting for people who couldn't come back. But then Sophie asked a question that split Maya's world open. She asked if maybe, instead of waiting for someone who was gone, Maya might want someone who was right here. Maya's breath caught in her throat. Sophie continued, the words tumbling out faster now, as if she'd been practicing them. She said she knew she wasn't a prince or a husband. She knew she was just a kid nobody wanted. But she'd been watching Maya, and Maya was kind. Maya made her feel safe. Maya read her stories and didn't yell and made funny pancakes. Sophie's voice broke as she asked the question that would change both their lives. She asked if Maya would consider being her mama instead. The silence that followed was enormous. Maya felt tears streaming down her face before she even realized she was crying. This little girl, who'd been passed from place to place, who'd learned not to hope too hard for anything, was offering herself to Maya. Was asking to be wanted. Was brave enough to risk rejection because maybe, just maybe, they could save each other. Maya thought about Daniel. She thought about the life she'd planned, the future she'd lost. She thought about the 3 weeks she'd spent in a wedding dress, waiting for a ghost. And then she thought about Sophie, with her serious eyes and her careful way of eating pizza and her nightmares that needed soothing. She thought about how this child had pulled her back into the world of the living, one small moment at a time. The answer came from somewhere deep inside her, from a place she didn't know still existed. Maya reached out and pulled Sophie into her arms, holding her tight as they both cried. She whispered yes into the little girl's hair. Yes, she would try. Yes, she wanted to. Yes, they could be a family, even if it was a family neither of them had imagined. When Patricia arrived, she found them on the couch together, Maya's arms wrapped around Sophie. Patricia took one look at the scene and her professional expression softened into something almost hopeful. Maya told her that she wanted to keep Sophie, not just for a few days, but permanently if possible. She wanted to start the foster-to-adopt process. She wanted to be this child's mother. Patricia's eyebrows rose in surprise, but she pulled out different paperwork, her pen moving quickly across the forms. She explained it would be complicated, there would be home studies and evaluations and court dates. But Maya's temporary guardianship could be extended. The process could begin. It wasn't a guarantee, Patricia warned. But it was a possibility. Sophie looked up at Maya with eyes full of fragile hope. She asked if this meant she could stay. Maya nodded, her heart feeling fuller than it had in weeks. The little girl's face broke into a smile so bright it seemed to light up the entire apartment. She asked if she could call Maya Mama starting now, or if she had to wait for the paperwork. Maya laughed through her tears and said now was perfect. After Patricia left, promising to return with more forms and information, Maya and Sophie sat together in the living room surrounded by wedding presents. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, warm and golden. Sophie asked what they should do with all the gifts. Maya looked around at the symbols of a life that would never be, and instead of pain, she felt something like peace. She told Sophie they would return what they could. They would donate what they couldn't return. They would make space for a different kind of life, one that included school supplies and children's books and maybe eventually a proper bed instead of the couch. Sophie suggested they keep the picture frames though. For new pictures. For new memories. That evening, Maya took down the photo of her and Daniel from the mantel. She held it for a long moment, remembering the man who'd loved her, who'd wanted to marry her, who'd died too young on a rain-slicked road. She told him goodbye, not with anger or denial, but with love and acceptance. She placed the photo in a memory box, alongside the unsigned marriage certificate and her wedding invitation. These things had happened. This loss was real. But it didn't have to define her future. The first few months were harder than Maya had imagined. Sophie's trauma manifested in unexpected ways. She hoarded food in her backpack, convinced scarcity was always around the corner. She woke screaming from nightmares about abandonment. She tested Maya constantly, pushing boundaries to see if this love was real or just another temporary situation that would evaporate like all the others. Maya discovered reserves of patience she didn't know she possessed. When Sophie threw tantrums, Maya held her until the storm passed. When the little girl lied about trivial things, Maya calmly worked to build trust instead of anger. When Sophie sobbed that Maya would probably leave her too, just like everyone else, Maya looked into those scared eyes and made the only promise she could keep. She promised that she would choose Sophie every single day, even on the hard days, even when things got messy. The home study process was invasive and exhausting. A social worker named Karen came every 2 weeks, examining every corner of Maya's life with professional scrutiny. Maya's apartment, her finances, her mental health, her support system. Everything was documented and evaluated. Karen asked pointed questions about Daniel, about Maya's grief, about her ability to parent a traumatized child. Maya answered honestly, acknowledging her struggles while demonstrating her commitment. Maya's mother became an unexpected ally. The woman who'd begged her daughter to take off the wedding dress now showed up every week with groceries and help and grandmother energy. She took Sophie to the park while Maya attended therapy. She taught both of them to bake cookies, filling the apartment with warmth and the smell of chocolate chips. She told Maya she was proud of her, and those words healed something Maya hadn't realized was broken. Sophie started school in January. Maya walked her to the bus stop that first morning, her heart in her throat. The little girl turned back 3 times, checking that Maya was still there, still watching. Maya waved each time, staying on that corner until the bus disappeared from view. When she got home, she cried, but they were different tears than before. These were tears of hope mixed with fear, the emotions of someone whose heart was once again vulnerable because it had something precious to lose. The nightmares gradually decreased. Sophie began to trust that breakfast would be there in the morning, that Maya wasn't going anywhere. She stopped hoarding food. She started calling Maya Mama without hesitation, the word becoming natural and easy. She brought home artwork from school, crude crayon drawings of 2 stick figures holding hands, labeled me and my Mama in careful letters. In March, Karen recommended approval for adoption. The court date was set for late April. Maya marked it on the calendar with a gold star, and Sophie touched it reverently every morning, counting down the days. They shopped for a dress for Sophie to wear to court. Not a white wedding dress, but something pink and sparkly that made the little girl spin in circles, giggling at her reflection. Daniel's family reached out during this time. His mother called, her voice thick with emotion. She said she'd heard about Sophie, about the adoption. She said Daniel would have loved seeing Maya become a mother. She said grief had many paths, and Maya had found hers. They met for coffee, and Maya introduced Sophie to Daniel's mother. The older woman cried and hugged the little girl, telling her she was lucky to have Maya. Sophie, with her innate wisdom, replied that Maya was lucky to have her too. The adoption hearing fell on a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 year and 2 days after the wedding that never happened. Maya wore a blue dress, professional and hopeful. Sophie wore her sparkly pink outfit, her hair in careful braids. They held hands in the courthouse hallway, both nervous, both excited. Karen was there, smiling genuinely for once. Maya's mother sat in the gallery, tissues already in hand. The judge was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a reputation for being tough but fair. She reviewed the case file, asked Sophie a few gentle questions, and listened carefully to the little girl's enthusiastic answers. Sophie told the judge that Maya made the best pancakes and read stories with funny voices and always kept her promises. She said she used to be scared all the time, but now she felt safe. She said she wanted Maya to be her mama forever, not just for right now. The judge granted the adoption. Her gavel came down with a decisive crack that echoed through the courtroom. Maya and Sophie were officially, legally, permanently a family. Sophie launched herself into Maya's arms, both of them crying and laughing simultaneously. The judge smiled and said she could see this was exactly where both of them belonged. They celebrated with ice cream and a small party at Maya's apartment, which Sophie now called home. Friends came, the ones who'd stayed through Maya's darkest period and the ones who'd drifted away but wanted to celebrate this new beginning. There was cake and laughter and Sophie showing everyone her adoption certificate, her name legally changed to Sophie Chen Walsh, combining Maya's name with the one her birth mother had given her. That night, after the guests left and the decorations came down, Maya tucked Sophie into her new bed in her new bedroom. They'd painted it purple together, Sophie's favorite color. The walls held photos now, not of a wedding that never was, but of a mother and daughter learning to be a family. Sophie at her first day of school. Maya and Sophie baking cookies. Sophie meeting Daniel's mother. A year of moments that built something real. Sophie asked Maya if she was still sad about her prince. Maya thought carefully before answering. She explained that she would always love Daniel, would always carry him in her heart. But sadness wasn't the main thing anymore. Now there was Sophie, and school projects, and bedtime stories, and planning for tomorrow. There was life happening, messy and imperfect and beautiful. Sophie nodded with understanding beyond her years. She said she was glad Maya had been waiting that day she knocked on the door. She said sometimes things work out different than you plan, but that doesn't mean they work out wrong. Then she asked if they could get a puppy, because families in books always had puppies. Maya laughed and said maybe, they'd see. Sophie grinned and closed her eyes, secure in the knowledge that maybe from Maya usually meant yes eventually. Within minutes, she was asleep, her breathing soft and even. Maya stood in the doorway watching her daughter, this child who'd saved her by asking to be saved, and felt overwhelming gratitude. She thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, standing at an empty altar in a wedding dress, waiting for a ghost. That Maya had been drowning in grief, unable to imagine a future without the life she'd planned. This Maya was different. She'd learned that love took many forms, that family could be chosen, that sometimes the most important promises were the ones you made to yourself. She'd learned to honor the past while embracing the present. Before turning off Sophie's light, Maya whispered into the darkness. She thanked Daniel for the time they'd had, for teaching her about love, for being part of her story. And then she thanked Sophie for knocking on her door, for asking an impossible question, for having the courage to want a family when family had always disappointed her before. 2 thank yous, 2 kinds of love, both real, both transformative. The apartment was quiet as Maya prepared for bed. She passed the memory box on the shelf, the one containing photos and the unsigned marriage certificate. She touched it briefly, acknowledging what it held, then continued to her room. Tomorrow Sophie had a field trip to the zoo. There were permission slips to sign and lunches to pack and a small life that depended on her showing up. As Maya fell asleep, she realized she'd stopped waiting. She'd stopped existing in that liminal space between past and future. She was fully, completely present. A mother. A survivor. A woman who'd learned that sometimes the life you don't plan is exactly the life you need. Sophie had asked if Maya would be her mama instead, and in becoming a mother, Maya had found her way back to herself. Not the self she'd been before Daniel died, but someone stronger, someone shaped by loss and love and the unexpected grace of a little girl's question. The ghost husband she'd waited for had never arrived, but something better had appeared at her door instead.